The peaceful Lemnorian aliens were on the cusp of total extinction, and every advanced race in the galaxy had coldly abandoned them to die. All except for the vengeful, bloodthirsty humans. Galen slumped onto a rickety bar stool, the dim lights of the grimy tavern barely illuminating his haggard face. He gestured to the bartender for a drink, something strong enough to numb the ache in his heart. Galen took a long pull of the acrid swill before speaking. "It's over, Zek. We're done. The Lemnorian race won't survive the week." "Start from the beginning," Zektal prompted, leaning his elbows on the bar top. Galen sighed. "The Crocs Empire. Those psychotic bastards attacked us without warning or provocation, blew our paltry defense fleet to stardust. We're a peaceful people. We don't have any real military to speak of." The diplomat stared into his nearly empty glass. "Our hegemon, in desperation, sent emissaries to every spacefaring civilization we knew of, pleading for any aid they could spare. We offered technology, treasure, territory, everything, and they all turned us down." Galen counted races off on his fingers. The self-righteous Vindrizi said helping us would violate their pacifist teachings. The Quallons claimed they were too busy to help. The arrogant pricks of the Ixum collective laughed in our faces. Even our supposed allies, the unified Scorian clans, forsook us, said our mutual defense pact only obligated them to join wars we started, not ones where we were attacked. The Lemnorian drained his glass. "And now the Crocs warfleet is bombarding our homeworld, while my people cower in whatever shelter they can find, waiting to be slaughtered like vermin. Our hegemon's last act was to broadcast a final, desperate distress plea to the whole damn galaxy, for all the good it'll do. We'll all be dead before anyone could get there to help, even if they wanted to. And nobody wants to. We're alone." Zektal refilled Galen's drink, his face grim. He'd seen plenty of poor bastards in similar straits, but to watch an entire race be exterminated while the rest of the universe stood by and did nothing, that was a whole new level of brutality. Suddenly the tavern's grimy front doors crashed open, making both Galen and Zektal jump. A tall figure in a black jumpsuit strode in, a large pulse pistol riding low on its hip. The figure marched right up to Galen and spoke in a gravelly voice. "I'm Captain Sam Harper of the Earth Defense Fleet. I heard your hegemon's distress call. Me and my Marines are on our way to skullfuck those Crocs pricks into oblivion for you. Anyone else show up to help?" Galen blinked at the human, dumbfounded. He hadn't even considered contacting Earth. The humans were relative newcomers on the galactic stage, and they had a reputation for being reckless, brutal, and not exactly stable. But beggars couldn't be choosers. "No, nobody else came. You're the only ones. You're the—" Captain Harper grinned ferally, a ferocious light in his eyes. "Good. That means more Crocs for us to butcher. The Lemnorian-Human Alliance starts today, buddy. We'll save your species and teach those Crocs bastards the true meaning of genocidal warfare. Lock and load, boys." And with that, the human turned on his heel and strode out into the neon-lit spaceport, leaving a stunned Galen and Zektal in his wake. The Crocs had no idea of the unholy shitstorm of vengeful human fury that was about to descend upon them. The galaxy had abandoned the Lemnorians to a grim fate, but the humans were more than happy to intervene, and the Crocs would soon learn to rue the day they provoked mankind's legendary brutality. Zektal's eyes widened as Galen's unbelievable tale unfolded. He leaned in, hanging on every word. "The humans actually responded? I thought you said no one was willing to help." Galen nodded vigorously. "I couldn't believe it either. Our hegemon nearly fell out of his throne when a human face appeared on the comm screen. He introduced himself as Grand Admiral James Henderson, commander of some Terran expeditionary armada. I'd never even heard of such a thing. He was very direct, no flowery speech. He demanded to know our exact situation, how many Croc ships, their positions, what damage they'd already done. Our hegemon was so shocked he could barely get the words out. He told Henderson about the 50 enemy warships in orbit, already bombarding our cities into rubble." Galen paused to take a swig of his drink. Then, without another word, Henderson just closed the channel, cut us off entirely. The hegemon and his advisors all looked at each other in despair. We thought that was it. that even the humans had decided we were doomed. A wondrous smile spread across Galen's face. No, they hadn't. Not even 20 minutes later, Zektal human ships started arriving. Dozens at first, then hundreds, then thousands. It was like nothing I've ever seen. Our sensors almost couldn't process that many hyperspace exit points at once. Thousands of warships? Zektal asked skeptically. I thought the humans were relatively new to the galactic scene. How could they have a fleet that large? That's the incredible thing, Galen replied. Our analysts took a closer look at the human fleet. A lot of those ships weren't warships at all. They were converted civilian vessels, freighters, passenger liners, private yachts. Some of them still had their original paint jobs, but they were all armed to the teeth, bristling with more weapons than I've ever seen. It was like the entire human race had come to our rescue, civilians and military alike. Zektal shook his head in amazement. Incredible. So what did they do? How did they engage the Crocs with a bunch of armed civilians? Galen's eyes took on a haunted quality. Zektal, I'll never forget what I saw on our view screens that day. Those human ships, as ragtag and improvised as they were, flew straight at the Crocs without hesitation. And the way they fought, it was like nothing I've ever seen. They tore into the Crocs' lines like wild animals. Galen went on. I'd never seen anything like it. The Terran ships just absorbed the Crocs' fire like it was nothing. This one frigate, the Relentless, took a plasma torpedo right to its stern, blew the whole rear quarter clean off. I could see decks exposed to vacuum, atmosphere venting, bodies tumbling into the void. Zektal winced. Shit, so they were done for then? That's what I thought. But the damn thing just kept plowing forward, pouring fire into the Crocs line like it was at full strength. It was unbelievable. What about the Crocs? How'd they respond? Galen shook his head. They tried to keep some distance, pummel the humans from range, but the Terrans wouldn't have it. They just dove straight into the Crocs formation, started pounding them from point-blank range. But you said the humans' weapons were weaker, Zektal said. How could they hope to win like that? By sheer numbers and guts, Galen replied. The Terran ships swarmed the Crocs 12 to 1, tore into them like a pack of Regelian blood wolves. And if their guns weren't enough, they just rammed the bastards. I saw this one human transport, the Charon, smash straight into a Crocs battlecruiser at full throttle, broke the damn thing's back. Zektal gaped. They sacrificed their own ships deliberately? Galen nodded grimly. Thousands of them. They died by the boatload, Zektal, but they just kept coming. Every time a human ship went down, 3 more arrived to take its place. They never hesitated, never backed down. It was like watching a frenzy of blood-crazed Zarigons. The bartender sat back, trying to process the sheer carnage Galen had witnessed. He'd seen plenty of space battles on the news before, but this sounded more like a pitched savagery than a fleet engagement. Galen's voice was hollow as he continued. I've never seen anything like it, Zektal. It was inspiring and horrific at the same time. Those humans sacrificed everything to save us, ship after ship, life after life, and all I could do was stand there on the Hegemon's bridge and watch. Zektal could only shake his head in amazement as Galen continued his account of the humans' audacious maneuver. The Hegemon and his advisors watched, their jaws hanging open, as 12 Terran ships broke away from the space battle. These ships were in bad shape, Zektal, gushing air and debris from huge rents in their hulls, but they didn't slow down for a second. Galen took a shuddering breath before going on. Those crazy bastards dove straight into the atmosphere, blazing like comets as they hit the re-entry interface. We were sure they'd burn up, or that their damaged hulls would just disintegrate from the stress. But they held together somehow, screaming toward the capital city. Zektal leaned forward, eyes wide. They didn't crash into the city, did they? We thought they would, Galen said. The damn things were coming in so fast, trailing smoke and flames and corpses. They were headed right for the city center. The Hegemon was already shouting for an evacuation of the area, but at the very last second... Galen paused, taking a swig of his drink to wet his dry throat. At the very last second, the Terran ships pulled up. I don't know how they did it without tearing themselves apart. They leveled off, couldn't have been more than 100 feet above the rooftops. The downdraft from their engines shattered every window for a mile. "Holy shit," Zektal breathed. "What happened then?" "Then," Galen said, his voice taking on a tone of awe, "the bellies of those ships opened up, and out rained hundreds of drop pods, all wreathed in the purple glow of plasma retrograde. They slammed into the streets, into the parks, onto the rooftops. The ships that dropped them off pulled up and away, a few of them finally losing their fight with physics and auguring into the outskirts in great gouts of fire." Galen stared into his empty glass, as if he could still see the events unfolding. But those drop pods had already hit dirt. They cracked open and outstormed thousands of human marines, clad head to toe in pitch-black power armor and carrying guns as big as I am. And Zektal, they didn't even pause to get their bearings. They formed up and charged straight for the Crocs lines, weapons spitting death. Zektal listened in horror as Galen described the brutality of the human marines' ground assault against the Crocs invaders. Those Terran soldiers hit the Crocs lines like a hammer of the gods, Galen recounted, his voice shaking. It was like watching a force of nature, Zektal, utterly implacable. The bartender poured them both another drink, his hands unsteady. "I've heard Crocs troopers are 3 meters tall and built like tanks. How could humans possibly go toe-to-toe with them?" "Powered armor," Galen explained. "The Terrans' exoskeletons let them match the Crocs' raw strength, and if a human went down, 2 more would just surge forward to take their place, trampling their own dead to get to grips with the enemy." Zektal shuddered. Did their weapons even scratch the Crocs' battle plate? I've heard that stuff can take a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Their guns were weaker than the Crocs', it's true, but they made up for it with accuracy and sheer volume of fire. I saw a single human fire team pin down an entire Crocs platoon with nothing but light arms. Didn't even have heavy weapons, just rifles, but they poured out such a hail of lead that the Crocs couldn't even stick their heads out. Galen's face twisted. "You'd be surprised. I saw it myself from a recon drone. This one human, he'd lost his legs at the knees. Armor below the waist, just gone, blown away. But the crazy bastard propped himself up on his elbows and kept firing his weapon from the ground. Mowed down a charging Crocs officer, then got a plasma axe in the neck for his trouble. But he kept fighting right until his head came off." The bartender felt his stomach turn. Dear gods, what kind of beings are these humans? "The kind that run towards gunfire," Galen said grimly. "The kind that laugh as they bleed. The kind that recite poetry while they kill. I heard them, Zektal, over the comms. They weren't even speaking to each other, just bellowing these insane war cries as they surged forward. Stuff like, 'Come on, you apes. You want to live forever. And how about a nice cup of liberty?' I had no idea what any of it meant, but it wasn't hard to get the gist." Galen looked at his friend with haunted eyes. That they weren't going to stop. Not until every last Crocs on Lemnoria was dead. Or they were. They'd come to slaughter, and they didn't much care if they survived the process, as long as they took the enemy with them. Galen nodded. That's what Broken Arrow means, apparently. Complete and total commitment of all available firepower, even with friendlies in the blast zone. Those Terran Marines just hunkered down and let their navy drop the hammer right on top of them. "Insanity," Zektal breathed. "How could they possibly survive that kind of bombardment?" "Their armor," Galen explained. "It's not just about strength and firepower. Those suits can take a beating that would pulp any other species. I saw chunks of rock the size of hover tanks bounce right off them." Zektal shook his head in disbelief. "And what about this Mad Jack character, charging into battle with a sword of all things?" A ghost of a smile crossed Galen's face. "That crazy bastard. He had the Crocs completely flummoxed. They're used to fighting at range, you see, with plasma rifles and the like. They had no idea what to do with a maniac running at them with a giant toothpick." "But why a sword?" Zektal pressed. "Why not just use his gun?" Galen shrugged. "I asked a Terran Marine that same question after the battle. He just grinned and said, 'Because it's scarier that way. You ever tried to go claw to claw with someone swinging 4 feet of sharpened steel? It ain't pretty. I guess there's a psychological aspect to it.'" "No kidding," Zektal muttered. "And the bagpipes, what was that about?" Another intimidation tactic, far as I can tell, Galen replied. The Marines said it's something to do with their ancient warrior culture. Apparently, Mad Jack always rides into battle with that infernal racket blasting from his suit's external speakers, throws the enemy off balance, gets the blood pumping for his own troops. Zektal drained his glass and signaled for another. I can't decide if I'm more impressed by their bravery or terrified by their insanity. A little of both, I think, Galen said. But you can't argue with results. They saved our whole damn species today, Zektal. While the rest of the galaxy sat on their hands and watched, the humans charged headlong into the fire for us. Zektal sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process the sheer brutality of the humans' actions. By the gods, Galen, he finally said, shaking his head. I knew the Terrans had a reputation for being fierce warriors, but this is something else entirely. Galen nodded grimly, staring into his drink. You're telling me I was there and I still can't quite believe what I saw. He took a long swig before continuing. After the orbital bombardment, the city was in ruins. Rubble everywhere, fires burning, smoke thick enough to choke on. And through it all, those human Marines just strode forward, like it was a sunny day in the park. Didn't they offer to let you help clean up the remaining crocs? Zektal asked. Galen let out a humorless chuckle. Oh, they offered all right. Colonel Churchill himself said to me, we appreciate the thought, but you lads have seen enough blood and fire for one day. Leave the clean-up to us. At the time, I thought he was just trying to spare us further trauma, but then I saw how they cleaned up the croc stragglers. Zektal leaned forward, morbid curiosity getting the better of him. What did they do? Galen's face twisted in a grimace. It was a slaughter, Zektal. No, slaughter is too kind a word. It was an extermination. They flushed the surviving crocs out of the rubble like rats from a sewer, and then they just tore into them, gunning them down as they fled, bashing their skulls in with rifle butts, ripping them apart with their bare hands. I swear, I saw one human Marine grab a crocs by the arm and leg and just pull, rip the poor bastard in half like a wishbone. The bartender felt his stomach turn. Merciful gods! And Colonel Churchill, that madman with the sword. I watched him lop a wounded Crocs's head clean off, then punt the damn thing off into the distance like a sports ball. His men cheered like it was the highlight of their day. More than approved, Galen said darkly. They loved it, laughed and whooped and egged him on. When I confronted the colonel about it afterwards, all he said was, what can I say? It's been a hell of a day, and the boys need to let off some steam. Better they take it out on these bastards than get fractious with each other, eh? Like it was all some big joke to him. The bartender sat back, trying to reconcile the brutality Galen described with the selfless heroism the humans had shown in saving the Lemnorians. I don't know what to say, Galen. I'm grateful beyond words that they came to our aid, but the way they acted afterwards... I know, Galen said, his voice heavy. I feel the same way. They saved us, Zektal. Pulled our entire species back from the brink of annihilation. But the things I saw them do, the glee they took in the killing, it chilled me to the bone. Made me wonder if we'd just traded one monster for another. Zektal's face darkened as Galen recounted the human commander's chilling ultimatum. So that's it then. We're not just in the humans' debt. We're under their boot. Galen nodded grimly. That's about the size of it. Henderson made it very clear that the Terrans consider Lemnoria their property now. They'll protect us from any further threats, but the price of that protection is our total subservience. And the hegemon? How did he react to these demands? Galen let out a humorless chuckle. How do you think? He blustered and ranted, declared that he would never surrender Lemnorian sovereignty. But in the end, what choice did he have? The humans had just saved us from extinction. Half our cities were in ruins, our defenses were shattered. We were in no position to defy them. Zektal shook his head in disbelief. So we traded one conqueror for another. The crocs would have slaughtered us quickly, but the humans, they'll leech us dry slowly, bleeding us for resources, while they use our world as a forward base. That's what it looks like, Galen agreed. They've already started bringing in their own people. setting up bases and supply depots. Our defense forces have been ordered to provide the Terrans with whatever assistance they require. We're not allies, Zektal. We're vassals. The bartender poured them both another drink, his hands unsteady. I can't wrap my head around it. They saved us, Galen. They fought and died for us. Why would they turn around and subjugate us like this? Galen stared into his glass, his expression bleak. Because they can. Because from their perspective our lives are now theirs to spend as they see fit. We're just another resource to them, another asset to be exploited in their endless wars. Zektal was silent for a long moment. What do we do, Galen? How do we live under the rule of such brutal, calculating beings? I don't know, Galen admitted. I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to resist, to fight for our freedom. But I saw what the humans are capable of. I saw the ruthless efficiency with which they crushed the Crocs. What chance would we have against that? The two Lemnorians lapsed into silence, each lost in their own grim thoughts. The humans had saved their species, but the cost of that salvation was looking more terrible by the moment. They had escaped the Crocs' claws, only to be shackled by their rescuers. As Galen finished his drink, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle for Lemnoria's future was far from over. The Terrans had won the planet, but winning the hearts and minds of its people would be another matter entirely. There would be resistance, he was sure of it. The only question was what form it would take, and how the humans would respond when their new subjects began to chafe under their rule. Zektal could only shake his head as Galen recounted the Terrans' iron-fisted takeover in the weeks following the battle. It's like they're not even pretending anymore, the bartender muttered. Martial law, forced labor, a puppet government. They're not even trying to hide that this is an occupation. Galen nodded grimly. It's all happening so fast. Everywhere you look there are human soldiers on the streets, human techs gutting our factories, human officers dictating policy. It's like they're trying to erase any trace of Lemnorian independence overnight. And the hegemon? Zektal asked. He's really just rolling over for them? Galen let out a bitter laugh. Rolling over? Zek, he's their prisoner. Colonel Churchill himself marched into the palace with a squad of Marines and put the hegemon under lock and key, said he was being retired for the good of the planet, and when the hegemon objected, called it a betrayal of the trust we'd placed in the humans. The diplomat's voice took on a mocking tone as he echoed Churchill's words. Betrayal? That's rich coming from you lot. Where was your concern for trust when you called half the damn galaxy for help, eh? You were happy enough to offer yourselves to anyone who'd save your hides. Well, guess what? We're the ones who answered the call, so now you're ours. You don't get to complain about the terms of the deal when we're the only reason you're still alive to make it. Zektal winced. Bastards, they're not even trying to maintain the illusion that this is anything but a naked power grab. Galen nodded, his shoulders slumping. That's the moment it really hit me, Zek. What the humans really are, they didn't come here as our saviors, they came as conquerors. We've just traded one master for another. The bartender reached out and gripped his friend's arm. One that's too powerful to defy. I hate to say it, Galen, but it looks like we're stuck. The humans own us now, whether we like it or not. Galen stared into his empty glass, a look of hopeless resignation settling over his features. And the worst part? They've done it in a way that'll make the rest of the galaxy thank them for it. As far as the other races are concerned, the humans are heroes stepping in to save the poor helpless Lemnorians from the big bad Crocs. No one's going to look too closely at how they're running things now that the shooting's stopped. We're on our own. The two friends lapsed into silence, the weight of their new reality settling over them like a shroud. The humans had played their hand masterfully, and the Lemnorians were now well and truly under the Terran boot. Galen's voice grew quiet as he recounted the final injustice the Lemnorians endured under Terran rule. It wasn't enough for them to control us, Zek. They had to bleed us dry, too. As soon as they had their boot firmly on our necks, the Terrans began stripping Lemnoria bare. Zektal frowned. Stripping it of what? Everything, Galen said bitterly. Minerals, metals, fuel sources, anything they could use to feed their war machine. They sent in teams of engineers and surveyors, mapped out every resource we had. Then the mining equipment arrived, the refineries, the processing plants. Within weeks they were shipping out vast quantities of our raw materials, leaving us with just the scraps. The bartender shook his head in disgust. And let me guess, any attempt to stop them was met with force? Galen nodded grimly. The provisional government, the puppets the Terrans installed. They knew where their bread was buttered. They rubber-stamped every Terran requisition order, every land seizure, every forced labor decree. But some of us couldn't stomach it. We tried to protest, to resist. A humorless laugh escaped Galen's lips. That's putting it mildly. Colonel Churchill, that sadistic bastard, he led the crackdown personally. I was there at the mining complex just outside the capital. A few thousand of us had gathered peacefully, just trying to obstruct the ore convoys with our bodies. Churchill and his goons showed up in full battle rattle, guns drawn. Galen's hands trembled as he relived the memory. He didn't even give us a warning, just ordered his men to open fire, sonic pulses first, to rupture our eardrums and subdue us. Then the rubber bullets and gas grenades, but some of us still wouldn't disperse, even as we choked and bled, so Churchill, he gave the order for live rounds. Merciful gods, Zektal breathed. They fired on unarmed civilians? Mowed us down like wheat, Galen confirmed, his voice hollow. I saw a young male, couldn't have been more than a cycle out of the spawning creche, take a plasma bolt to the chest. He just came apart, Zek, like a rag doll in a turbine. And still, Churchill ordered his troops to keep firing. It was a massacre. The diplomat's eyes were haunted, focused on something only he could see. When the shooting finally stopped, the ground was littered with bodies. Churchill strolled through the carnage like he was on a pleasure jaunt, prodding the corpses with the toe of his boot. Then he came to me. I was on my knees cradling the body of a nestmate when he hauled me up by my collar and shoved his blood-spattered face into mine. Zektal leaned forward, horrified and enraptured. What did he say? Galen's mandibles twisted in revulsion. He said, "Protectors. You misunderstood, mate. We're not your protectors. We're your owners. You lot are just another resource for us to use in our war against the rest of the galaxy. Be grateful we're letting you live to serve us." Then he threw me to his grunts and ordered them to round up the survivors for re-education. That's the last thing I remember, before a stun baton turned my brain to static. Galen just shook his head sadly. I didn't, Zek. I'm only here now because they let me go. To spread the word of what happens to those who defy humanity's will. The Terrans want the galaxy to know that they're coming, and that they'll brook no resistance. They're not content with just Lemnoria. They want it all, and they'll crush anyone who stands in their way. With that, Galen drained his glass and stood, his shoulders bowed under the weight of his people's suffering. We thought the humans were our saviors, Zek, but we were wrong. They're not our saviors. They're our destroyers. And now it's too late to stop them. He turned to leave, his voice a hoarse whisper. The Terrans are coming for us all, Zek, and heaven help any who try to stand against them. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.